Welcome to Project GT6, likely the best example of scope creep on YouTube. Okay, maybe that's a stretch, but keep in mind this was supposed to be your fairly typical restoration, not what you see here. After many years cooped up in a tiny workspace though, we found ourselves redesigning every single part under the bodywork in an effort to further the Grand Touring name by making our car far better suited for the long country roads of Canada. There's been a ton of progress already, and if you've missed it, blame the algorithm, go back, and catch up. Meanwhile though, last time we started down the path of fabricating a custom exhaust to let our LS4 breathe. And there's plenty more to do, so let's get on with it. If you haven't yet, consider subscribing and sharing the project with some friends. Now then, last time, a bunch of experienced viewers voiced legitimate concern about the lack of back purging going on, and I want to sincerely thank you for keeping an eye out for us. Let me tell you right now, there's going to be more of that today. In a nutshell, this project is being done by your average couple of numpties in a tiny space and on a limited budget. So, although our welds may not last as long as they could if we had back purged, the argon we've saved does add up significantly. To those not familiar with this process, normally your MIG or TIG welder supplies a shielding gas directly to the weld puddle you're working with to protect the molten metal from reacting with the atmosphere and creating really hideous side effects that weaken the joint. This works great in concept, but what happens to the backside of the weld? Well, on stainless steel specifically, you get oxides called sugaring, which is this unsightly stuff. And if you look really closely, you may even be able to see that the two pieces haven't actually fused on this side. Back purging prevents this anomaly by supplying the shielding gas to this area, and in the case of tubing, involves capping the ends, displacing all the air in the entire piece, and continuing to flush fresh gas through it as you weld. You can imagine this consumes a fair bit of not exactly cheap argon. It's true that not purging will lead to cracks later on, but that's just something we've had to come to terms with. And we do at least take some consolation in that our YouTube colleagues with a certain four-wheel drive turbo mini, which you may have heard of, also did not back purge. And if it's good enough for a couple of legends like them, it's certainly good enough for us. So, moving on. Thus far, we've built a set of pipes that take us from the back of our centrally mounted muffler under the diff and out the sides. It's honestly kind of depressing that weeks of work can be summarized that quickly, but there you go. Next, we just need to turn the corners to head back again, and normally I'd say something along the lines of how hard can that be, but there is a bit more going on than meets the eye. This last push will define how the system looks. As with pretty much every other car, everything in front of the diff is largely hidden from view. So then, this really is no time for complacency. We'll need to give this some serious thought, and we mentioned last time that some kind of special finishing touch is in order. As it turns out, quite a few of you had some great ideas as to what that might be, and the general consensus was dual upswept twin tips. Kind of like the Monza system available for these cars, or a bit like some older Ferraris. Best depicted by my favorite, this Eagle Speedster. Sorry. I have to agree. That would look stunning back here, though it should also come as no surprise to you that underneath our GT6 is nothing at all like a normal one, a good deal smaller than those other cars, and ultimately, 4 pipes would be a tight enough squeeze on their own without the further constraint of these bullet resonators. Yes, we wanted a bit more silencing than just the muffler on its own, as don't forget, this may be YouTube where open headers are king, but we actually need something viable for living. Therefore, we picked up a couple of these polished vibrant units, which are the best bang for the buck we could actually see fitting in this space we've got. And if you're wondering if they'll do anything, yeah, I think they will. Even if they didn't, I still think they'd be worth the effort for the shiny factor alone. Something to recognize here is that these are not mufflers, they're resonators, which supposedly have completely different jobs. Even though these share a similar build construction, mufflers are designed to reduce volume, while resonators act like echo chambers, which cause specific frequencies to cancel out by reflecting the sound waves against each other. Due to fitment, we're obviously putting these at the back of the car, and you may think, you idiots, the resonator has to come before the muffler. But actually, a lot of vehicles do it this way. The precise location just likely messes around with the tone a bit. But still, better something than nothing. Truthfully, we have no idea how loud the car will be when we finally do fire it up, but there's not much more we can do about that now. We do, however, have an ace up our sleeves if drone is present. Helmholtz resonators. Honestly, these things are awesome. It's simply a length of tubing with a cap on one end, and it uses the same principles of noise cancellation that we just talked about. The really cool thing about them, though, is you can do a bit of homework and figure out precisely what length and diameter you will need to correct the drone you're experiencing. As you can imagine, this is good news, and it's not even about a Dacia Sandero. But as we'll have to wait until the car is running to see if they're even needed, in the meanwhile, we've allotted some space down the sides of the muffler, just to be safe. Getting back to the task at hand though, we're not gonna mess around with 4 pipes back here. We're just gonna simplify life and stick one out each side, wide enough apart to let the fuel tanks sit in between. Which feels familiar. Right. I could feel ashamed for taking the easy way out here, though frankly I think we've earned it. But we actually like the looks of just duals, with one exception. We don't want a tacked-on utilitarian look. So we had another sit, did some research, and came up with an idea. Something I've seen on other cars and have a hunch could work well is cutting the valence panel to recess the pipes and provide a more factory integrated look. Now this will require tilting the pipes up a bit, and to do that, this last bend will need to be a bit more than 90 degrees. And to figure out how much more, we need to get creative. Another fun-filled evening here. This hodgepodge of scrap is what's trying to get us as close as we can to our target. And it is an exhaust at the end of the day. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we'd like to get close. So currently we've just got our fancy little iPhone level here saying we're zeroed out in that direction. We should be about 12 here, and then we're aiming for about 8 here. So that gets us the angles that we need to reach from the back of the muffler out to the back. But this is a straight line, and we want this paralleling that. So that's been kind of fun. Unfortunately, some of the tools that I need are inside this drawer, which we should have grabbed earlier. But anyways, this is a piece of angle iron on the edge of our desk here, so it's a reasonably straight line to go off. So if I just hold this ruler up onto here, and I eyeball down to the top, we're about 248 millimeters or so, and that's about the 248 there too. So from this line, we've straightened up this section of tube. Then we can ignore everything in the middle and come back to here, where on the surface this would appear to be a fairly precise piece of measuring equipment. This is not. We're going to use them together, so therefore this is not. It's all very fun. Not the best way to do it, but I'm trying to square off the face of this angle iron. When I measure off to that point there, on that face, and then I come back here and do the exact same measurement, we're good there. So, what we've ended up with through all of this is nothing we can weld, but it's something we can measure. And what we're trying to measure here is a gap. This gap could be filled with weld, but we're not going to do that. Because what you actually need to do is take that amount of material out of this side. So that little black line, vertical line right there, is a rough approximate of how far back we need to cut this tube. And that horizontal line is a rough approximate of where this tube is touching that tube, because remember, this is clocked up 8 degrees. So having done all this, I think we can take it apart, grind that out, and then I guess we'll do all of this again to tack it back together later, and then we'll repeat on that side.
Sounds like fun.
Yay! With all that fun taken care of, I've masked off the air to keep, and we'll just use the flap disc to remove the exposed remainder. Obviously, this is a tedious process best accomplished by removing a small amount at a time. But in the end, I think that's fitting up nicely, and with a quick check, it looks like all the angles are still where they need to be as well. Back under the car again, with shims providing clearance to the frame, and the resonator just slid into place, you can get a better idea of where we're going to need to trim the valence. But first though, we of course need to create a mirrored bend for the other side, which is located and verified by a length of angle iron and a highly accurate measuring device of sorts. With both new bends tacked in place though, we've now got a set of pipes that even an OCD nut like myself can be reasonably proud of, so moving on. These resonators have a couple inches of extra material on the ends so they can be clamped or welded to the rest of the system. But we don't like that, so we're trimming them back to only an 1/8 inch lip. A couple of pieces of straight pipe get ripped to length next, and we're keeping them oversized for now, as we'll come back to put the finishing touches on later. The cuts are cleaned up with a carbide burr and flap wheel, as per our routine, and even after a bunch of use so far, these burrs are holding up surprisingly well to the relatively low RPM of a corded drill. Setting things up for welding always seems to take about quadruple the time needed to actually weld them, and in this case, a second piece of pipe, 4 band clamps, an F-clamp, a piece of MDF, a tool chest, and a small piece of wire hammered to the right thickness have managed to get everything in line and even up the gap around the tubing. We could then put tacks in as many places as could be reached, try out some different positions, and ultimately weld it up completely. There are 2 beads here. This one is the factory weld, which I didn't want to cut off as then the resonator would fall apart. And right next to it is mine, which honestly looks not too shabby. Pretty pleased. I think those are going to look quite nice sticking out the back of the car.
Well done. Weld done.
Moving on, we've slammed the first sections in place once more, and it's looking even more awesomer back here. Sorry, even more gooder. My apologies. The width is pretty close to when we got the car, but more importantly, it's exactly what we were planning, as seen in this crude Photoshop I made a while ago. Something that I think has worked out quite well is the main sections of the pipe seen here were each taken from one side of a bend. So there isn't even a single weld bead in sight until here, and I'm fairly pleased with how those ones turned out. You can see we're well and clear of the fuel tank, and some heat shields later will make sure things stay nice and cool in that regard. The upward angle is relatively subtle, but will echo that pinch seam on the quarter panel, and on the whole, this is great. So let's address the need for some clearance for the next step. Seen here are some Sharpie lines of the proposed cuts, which will need some tweaking, but should at least get you the idea. With a helping hand, we were able to get a bead on how it'll turn out, and satisfied, we can whip out the cutting disc to make it happen. That was a cut I've been sort of hesitating to do for years, but I think I'm glad we were doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not too bad for eyeballing the line. It may need a bit of trimming on the right-hand side to better match the left, but That looks pretty reasonable for now. Using a piece of cardboard, we've got a template of this cut. And after measuring the panel to make sure we're staying even to the center line of the car, we can mark out the twin over here, stand back, quintuple check we're okay, and send it. Okay, those pipes are obviously way too long right now, but ignore that. Everything else is a win. I am honestly stoked, and once trimmed down, it's going to look even better than I imagined. I can sense it. The pipes are tucked up nicely into the recesses, and we've got enough extra material that we can still tweak the valence later if we need to. The resonators were just slid into place for those shots though, mind, so we still need to trim down the ends. An offcut from a second ago slips nicely onto the next section that needs trimming, so we can get a perfect line to cut along, as this too will need to be done by hand. And after completing the other side, it's all back in place one last time. Fitment to the valence is still looking great from side to side, and each piece has been shimmed and tweaked to be as close to even and parallel as possible. It's really amazing to see everything here after all this effort, as although it may take some people a matter of a few days to get this kind of stuff done, we've been learning all the way, and it's definitely taken a bit longer than that. Nonetheless though, we're here now. And I can try my hand at some upside down TIG welding to lock those final pieces of the puzzle in place.
Next car is going to be bigger than this one, people.
Bigger.
Done!
Yeah, look at that. Move one side, it's all moving now. That is fantastic.
So this is, we'll take it off and finish welding on the bench.
Yes, we will. And then these will get cut down at a point too.
It's great.
That was awkward. Again, I must stress, the tailpipes still need to get trimmed down and finished off. But look at it! It's got an exhaust, and that just makes me so happy. Yeah, there's a ton of different variations we could have tried, and maybe this isn't the most exciting one, but we like it, and it's nearly done, and that's what's so great. In fact, we could wrap things up there, but there's a lot on the agenda for next time, so let's try to get one more job crossed off today. Surprise! We're back at the chop saw again, as don't forget, we still haven't done a thing to connect the engine to the muffler, and that could be problematic. This front section originally seemed like it would be more complicated than the back. But after seeing what happened out back and looking at what's left, I really hope that statement was wrong. With a bit more thinking, we've got a plan formulating in our minds, and we're going to need some 45-degree bends to make it happen. Now, conveniently, our kit came with 4 of these, but to minimize waste, 2 of the 4 we'll need will be produced by cutting a single 90 in half. Using the jig, this is fairly straightforward, as we've marked out the angle from the center line and can measure to either side of the pipe to make sure we're even. Though, as I said last time, these bends aren't quite perfect, and this 90 is actually slightly more obtuse than that. So measuring it is a bit of a best guess, but still, I think those came out very similar. And with that, here's what's going on. The muffler is directly on the other side of the transmission crossmember, so this really was one of the only ways to make it all fit, and hopefully it goes some way towards explaining why the crossmember was built the way it was. The two new bends were needed to get around the transmission, and while things are very tight in places, some heat shields, heat wrap, and some special hangers will tie it all together later. From here though, you can just about see the end of the passenger side manifold, which is our target. And it's going to be a tight squeeze as well, with a few things in our way, but the very fact that we have a line of sight says it must be doable. So, those first two parts can get welded up, and we can start the twin for the other side.
Okay, so we're getting ready to do the welding on there, but, well, the last time we forgot to do something. So, what are you going to do?
We're gonna clean it this time.
Yeah, when are you going to do that?
I'm gonna do it right now.
Right now, yeah, I guess
Immediately.
so. Yeah, immediately. Let's get on with it, buddy boy.
Dirty pipes.
Dirty pipes, difficult welds.
Anyway, things sure do go more smoothly when you actually remember to clean the weld area first. But there you go. Two identical pipes ready to take us most of the way towards finishing the front end. I still can't say I've got the hang of this whole TIG welding thing even after all this practice, but these are definitely usable, and with them in place under the car, they're actually pretty stylish too. So, we've got an 18-inch muffler with clearance for heat shields and potential Helmholtz resonators, axle backs with bullet resonators that will just need a bit of trimming, and now half of our downpipes. Not bad. We'll finish off the last bit next time, as well as make some hangers and take care of a few other not-so-little surprises. So if you haven't yet, you really should hit that subscribe button. A huge thank you to our amazing patrons and donators for their continued support, and if you'd like to help contribute, please check out the links below. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Fanatik Builds, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching.